Martin Owen, welcome to the Onstage Fright. Now, as a horn player, you've got a really active international career as soloist, chamber musician and orchestral player. You've been principal horn of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and you're currently principal horn of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And I know that you've been guest principal with the Berlin Philharmonic and orchestras like the Chamber Orchestra of Europe. Now, the horn is a really exposed instrument. How do you keep your cool in such high-pressure situations?
Well, that's a great question to start with, and I will have to say that it's experience that counts for just about everything when you play an instrument like this. Of course, you hear people say that they learn from their mistakes, and I can remember so many performances of so many different pieces where things didn't quite go to plan. And I had to really go back to the drawing board in a way and actually work out why. I had to get myself into a routine to find out how these things should really work out on stage. But there's a definite feeling that you get when everything is working well and when mentally you are just as prepared as physically, that you just know that things are going to come across. And if something does go wrong, it's sort of knowing how to find out how to get back on track. And I think that's the difference between someone who is a young professional who just starts out and someone who has been doing it for quite a few years. Because you just don't know how to cope with these situations when they suddenly arise. And of course, everything can change in a performance.
Have you got any particular routines or things that you do to prepare for a performance?
Well, I don't have any particular hard and fast routines that I would stick to, but I think I just do the most sensible things that I can do, really. I try and rest as much as I can if I have quite a difficult performance. I make sure that I don't play too much on the day, in the rehearsal just before it. And that's a mistake which I heard quite a few, I'm not going to name names, of course, but when I was studying at the Royal Academy of Music, we used to get visiting professors and brass quintets, and it was great for us because they would really take us through some amazing sectionals and rehearsals, but they would play their hearts out in the rehearsal, and in the concert you would just hear the level starting to tail off. And so even at that early stage, we really thought, okay, this is how to make good preparation, it's just to look after yourself a little bit more. Also, your food intake. It's something that I think lots of people consider and lots of people don't consider. Now, someone like me, when I get nervous for a concert, which can be quite a lot of this time, I'm not saying that it's extreme like perhaps it used to be when I was really young, but I don't want to eat. And this is a problem I think that a lot of people tend to face. And I make sure that I really force myself to have at least 1 or 2 bananas, for example, a couple of hours before I play. It makes the world of difference. It just gives you that extra energy, and it helps in some way to translate into this positive adrenaline, which not only gets you through a concert, but really makes you focus and enjoy it. So bananas have featured sort of quite important in an important way for me before a concerto, for example.
I've come across so many musicians who can't eat before a performance, and I don't know how much that is nerves and how much that is actual physical not being able to digest and perform.
I would say almost 100% of the time it will be nerves. I think bananas, they seem to work for me because of the carbohydrate, the sugar. It's also very easy to digest, and it's something that's easy to eat. You know, you mash it up, you can mash it up and put it on toast, and it's like baby food, you know. But it's very sort of comforting in a way, even if you feel slightly nauseous. So that's just one of the things that I do. But recently, I've really started sort of looking into what is in my diet, which, to be honest, I just really didn't think was terribly important. I guess now I'm getting older. I'm 41 years old, and I really think that keeping a better physical shape as well does help me, and it gives me a better feeling mentally when I go out on stage. I want to feel in better physical shape than I used to. Maybe it's because I found everything easy when it was going well, but at the same time, I think when it wasn't going well, maybe I would sweat more. I would panic a little bit more. And now I think there's just a level of underlying calmness, if that makes sense, which didn't used to exist in the same way.
So, going back to the food, what is it that you're doing differently?
Well, at the moment, I'm not snacking in between meals, and actually, I'm not eating very much meat at the moment, and I'm tending to sort of eat fish. And it's just, I think just the fact that I'm not sort of stuffing myself for every meal. I feel that I've got more energy. I feel that I can even get up at 9 o'clock in the morning for a Skype session with you. And I actually feel alive while I'm doing it. Do need a cup of tea though, I have to say.
So what would you say are the biggest stresses of being a principal horn in one of these really high pressure, prominent orchestras?
Well, it really is the pressure that's on you to perform constantly and consistently, day in, day out. Now, I'm in the BBC Symphony Orchestra at the moment. We have shared principal horns, so I only have to do about half the work, which does make a lot of difference. When I was working in Berlin, it was the same way, but I think I felt that the Berlin Philharmonic just worked a little bit harder, and also they did 3 concerts each week of each programme, and in the BBC we only do 1. Now, in some ways I feel that's better, because you actually get an opportunity to perform the same pieces, and if something doesn't go quite right, you always have other opportunities to have another go and to really, really perfect what you want to do. In the BBC, it's just 1 performance. The flip side of the coin is that because it's just 1 performance, everyone tends to give their all, which is why I enjoyed playing for the BBC Symphony Orchestra so much, particularly in the proms. But yes, going back to the pressure of going out on stage and always having to do it, always having to perform your best. And of course, the more you do that, and the better player you become, the more consistent you become, there's also a higher expectation of you. And we were talking a little bit earlier just about what it's like to play this instrument and how you cope with the nervous side of things. I remember very, very clearly when I was doing this Berlin work, and I was also playing in the BBC at the same time, so I was flying backwards and forwards, London to Berlin quite a lot. And I went on stage to play a concerto with another orchestra. I think it was in Denmark or something like this. And I went out and did the rehearsals and went out and played the concert, and I've never felt so free and so relaxed. A week later, I went into Berlin, and we were just playing, I think, a Shostakovich 6, I think it was. Nothing much in it for the horn. I mean, enjoyable. I love Shostakovich. And I remember approaching just a little solo, not very much to play, at the end of the first movement. And suddenly I thought, oh my God, it's just the pressure on you just to do this. And I just thought, I must get it right, I must get it right. And I did, but I felt that it was almost a little bit shaky. I don't think anyone else would have really picked that up. But what I was going through and how fast my heart was beating for this particular solo, and I just thought, this is stupid, because you can't measure, you can't compare just a small line of notes just in the middle of a symphony when everyone else is playing, and then compare that to a Strauss Second Horn Concerto, which I just performed the week before with absolutely no problem whatsoever. It felt really fine and relaxed. So sometimes this happens, not just to me, but sometimes the students who I teach, both at the Royal Academy and in Valencia as well, they're 2 very different schools, but both with very fine musicians, and they have the same problems. When you stand in front of an orchestra, sometimes it feels easy because you're in control. when you're sitting there and you might only have 2 exposed notes in one symphony to play, and you can have nightmares about it. You can have you'll be going crazy. You won't sleep well, and I have to think, why is this? Why do we put so much pressure on ourselves? And after a few experiences like this, I really thought actually, the problem is that I care far too much about what other people think. And I'm always thinking about people that were judging me, you know? I have changed quite a bit since then, and I don't think in the same way anymore. And I just think about the music. I try and think that other people who are coming to listen to the concert, they're thinking about the music. And it's only perhaps very, very few who are maybe small-minded enough to see if the solo horn is going to crack this particular entry. Hopefully they're thinking about something else. So why should I care about it in the same way? I should just make music, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's history. So after that, this is what I tell my students now. I'm always going to think about this as it's in the past, and you should always look forward, always look ahead, and always think about the music.
So that's your key thing to actually get you away from this real self-consciousness and nervousness.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think about this, and I think just the music being such an important part of our lives, because that's what we do for a living, and I don't think we should ever forget that. So many musicians I know, and myself included from time to time, we're always just thinking about ourselves. And actually, if we stop thinking about ourselves and just think about the products that we're giving to people, then it makes it a much more enjoyable experience. The first time I stood up in public to play the horn, I was 13 when I started, and I must have been, it was probably about maybe 2 years later, and I just started at the junior academy. And so, as I was thinking about possibly becoming a professional player if everything worked out in the future, I went back to school in Hastings and stood up in front of the school and played the last movement of Mozart's Fourth Horn Concerto, and it started off beautifully. I mean, after about a minute, my mouth started going dry. And I was thinking about what all these other students were thinking about me. First of all, that I was standing up and doing music and not football and rugby, and and suddenly I let all these feelings, all these projected feelings, because it probably wasn't true anyway, I let them all come into my head, and it was a disaster basically. So it didn't start off very well for me in that respect. And it's something that I guess for quite a while I was fighting, instead of just changing my mentality. And now I'm in a much happier place. Well, I have been for a while, to be honest, but it took a long time, actually. It took a very long time, right the way through music college to the beginning of my career, to really find out why I was playing this instrument.
And how would you sum it up? Why are you playing the instrument?
There's some great music out there. I mean, I wish there were more for the horn. There's fantastic chamber music in particular, wonderful symphonies, wonderful operas, which I don't get the opportunity to play so much. But music can just change you. Sometimes I just hear a piece and it almost brings tears to your eyes straight away. Part of it is just the emotion, part of it is because it's associative, and it brings back memories and feelings. So it's a bit like Proust's Madeleine, when he just gets a slight smell of this thing, and then it floods him for 100 pages of everything that was happening, and yeah, music does that as well. I mean, certainly does that for me, and I don't think that I could do another profession now apart from that. I mean, for a while I was thinking I would love to be a photographer in some shape or form, but that the competition for that is probably even more fierce than it is for music. So music as part of my life is something that is irreplaceable. Certainly at the moment. I don't know what will happen later on. And that's why I do it.
And do you think that passion is really essential to be able to manage all the things that come along with playing the horn at such a high level?
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think that, because if it's not there, what other reasons do you have? Especially if things don't start working exactly as you want them. I think you've really got to be able to work and go back to the drawing board sometimes and figure out how you're going to play certain phrases or certain pieces. And if you're not prepared to put the hours in, and if you haven't got a goal which means a lot to you, then I think you're going to find it really tough. There are quite a lot of brass players, I think brass players particularly, who end up going into the profession partly just because they've been very good at their instrument. They've started off, they found they've been able to play it quite naturally. They've never been particularly interested in music, a lot of them, but they just find that it's something that they can do very well. So if the real interest in music isn't there, I think they do find it a little bit of a struggle just to keep the standard up and just to keep really interested in it and to really just fall in love with music, fall in love with pieces. But, you know, music, it has a way of sorting people out like that, doesn't it? The ones who rise to the top are the ones who want it in the end.
How do you manage the stresses and strains of touring and airports and jet lag and having to, you know, suddenly be on top form when you're feeling exhausted? How do you manage all that?
Well, this is an absolutely great question, because touring is something that I've always struggled with. Due to probably just financial tightening over the years. I guess it's always been like this for a lot of orchestras, but sometimes you have to travel on the day of the concert, and you have tours where there's a concert almost every night, going from one place to the next, and I've always found it quite difficult. And I know a lot of other players as well who find it very, very difficult to always perform to a top level when they've been travelling all day and then having to rehearse in a rather strange acoustic, sitting in a slightly different place than they normally would in an orchestra. All these things, they do take their toll. And I made a decision, I think, by joining the BBC, that I wouldn't then go back to another orchestra, or I wouldn't go back to another orchestra which had to do a lot of touring like this. 10 years in the Royal Philharmonic, I think, was really enough for me, just because it had to travel so far and do so many concerts where you would get back from one place at 2 in the morning because you had to drive for 4 hours, and then check in at another airport at 6:30 in the morning, fly and then do a 3-hour rehearsal, then a concert, and then occasionally even fly back after the concert at night. And you know what? Despite all this, that orchestra would put out fantastic performances, but you could just see everyone was exhausted, totally exhausted. And I just thought, well, I just don't think I can do it much longer, because I don't think I would keep the level of playing up. There are some absolute heroes out there, particularly in the London orchestras, who have to do these things all the time, and they play faultlessly, night after night. And I just don't know how they do it now. I think it's exhausting. I play with this group called Camerata Pacifica, though, which is based in Santa Barbara, and they look after us very well. So that's the kind of, I guess it's touring, but you're staying in the same place the whole time. And they do their utmost to really look after the musicians. I mean, they're flying us business class whenever they can, and it makes the biggest difference. It really does, just to look after your health and your well-being. So there are certain touring which does work, and other times I I find it really hard. I know a lot of people do enjoy it as well because they get to see the world, but certainly playing principal horn is a very difficult thing to do.
The other thing that's interesting about the orchestral world is that the whole socialising and drinking aspect.
Yeah.
As a brass player and as a principal horn, you have to be so on the ball. How do you manage that whole culture, which is kind of, drinking lots of pints and yet at the same time keeping your cool and your focus and concentration?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, especially for the principal players, and I think the principal horn is the job on which you're on the knife edge a lot of the time, and you really have to look after yourself. You're absolutely right. But orchestras have changed, I think, a lot. Certainly since I started working, which was about 20 years ago. It's changed a lot, even in this time, and people tend to look after themselves a lot more. Back in the day, you hear all sorts of stories when people were perhaps possibly playing with certain levels of intoxication. However, I think the audience expects more, and they expect orchestras to play with a little bit more consistency these days, and any errors and mistakes are not accepted as much as perhaps they would have been. I'm not saying that orchestras played badly in those times, of course not. In fact, maybe the performances were perhaps even more exciting than they were at the moment. But just especially with financial constraints and competition between the orchestras, I really do think that that there's no room now to behave in a way that could jeopardize a performance. And there are, you hear people, you hear orchestras certainly saying that there's going to be a sort of total alcohol ban. And I don't know if that is a total solution, because I think if people want to do something, they're going to do it anyway. And some people, perhaps due to nerves, perhaps due to just because they're tired and travelling all the time, they feel they need something to get on stage. It's something that I have never been able to do. And luckily, I'm in a section in the BBC where we will certainly go out after a concert and let our hair down, and we will have a really nice time, and it's fantastic. But before the concert, everyone is on their best behaviour, and we wouldn't even consider jeopardising a performance by doing something stupid like that.
What is it like in the green room or behind, backstage before you go on as an orchestra? And how do you feel? How are you managing yourself at that sort of 10 minutes before?
Actually, this is a really good question, because everyone's different. When you play in an orchestra, it depends what people have to play. Sometimes someone will come 5 minutes before the concert's starting and just frantically getting changed. Other people are sitting quite calmly, reading books, perhaps, or just chatting. Some people are quiet. Some people are a little bit more boisterous. Some people, they like to provoke an argument because it helps them cope on stage. I've seen this quite a few times when someone has an issue with where someone else has put their case, or just talking about wanting to not play a concert coming up and having an argument with so-and-so because they've taken this off. And you sort of have to understand that they're not quite in a sane place at the moment, because performances, they can do that to you. You become all absorbed, and if you're feeling nervous about something, you just cope with it in a different way. I was doing a performance of a Schumann Concertstück for 4 horns and orchestra not so long ago, and just before backstage, I tend to go into myself a little bit, and I tend to just try and do some calm, deep breathing. I'm usually quite quiet. That's, of course, after having forced down the second banana, which I really didn't want to eat. And I was just looking around and seeing what the other guys were doing, and one guy was literally punching a wall and going, "Come on, come on, come on, come on. This is what's working." Someone else was reading a book, and I looked at another person with eyes like saucers, completely white face, and I just thought, oh my God, looks terrified. So you just have to say, right, come on, let's do it. Even though I might not feel like that myself, I just have to do it.
Does anybody talk about it? Do orchestral players talk about nerves amongst themselves?
Not so much, no. I wouldn't say it's a taboo subject. Like maybe some people who, if they have to have a drink before playing, for example, it's something that people don't really talk about and they don't like talking about. But nerves are something that no one really wants to admit that they really suffer from, and they won't really discuss it openly. And I think if people did a little bit more, I just think that others would feel that they weren't the only one. Everyone's in the same boat, and I believe that just about every player in the world suffers from nerves in one way or another before going on stage. And the nerves aren't the problem. In fact, they help. They give you a bit of adrenaline, and it's just turning it into positivity rather than negativity. And as we all know as musicians, if you are 90% positive, and you can use the 10% of technique that you might have practiced for one particular piece and turn out a really good performance. If it's the other way around, and you've been practicing something but you go out on stage and you're really not in the mood and you're feeling negative, then it's the opposite. So we really need to be very positive and use these nerves to our advantage, I think.
Why do you think it is that orchestral players don't discuss nerves and support each other with this?
I think the group dynamic has a lot to do with this, because when everyone is there together, no one really wants to show any weaknesses. And the way orchestral players survive, I guess, with each other, they feel that they're part of the team. And I don't think anyone feels like they really want to show that they're a weak link or they want to let each other down. So that's what I would say as far as that goes. And also, if you're in a section, are you really going to be the first one to say, actually, I don't think I can do my job? I mean, certainly I wouldn't want to say that.
And what do you think would happen if people started talking about this more, if they had the courage to actually step up and say stuff like this?
Well, I think it would be very healthy. I think there would be lots of underlying issues that would come out because people behave in very different ways, sometimes very unpredictable ways, because they might be nervous, because they don't feel that they're equipped to get out onto the stage for some particular reason. And if people talked about it more, then there would be more of an understanding. The trouble with orchestras as well is that sometimes, especially if you're in a very busy orchestra and you're touring a lot, you spend more time with these people than you do your family and your spouse. So if you haven't got a good relationship, if you don't really talk about things, then it's going to get quite difficult and quite early on. And then just think, you've got years and years playing with these people. So I do think it's really important to talk about these issues, and it's something that I tend to do naturally, a lot more than I used to anyway, and it does make me feel better. I feel that I have more understanding from other people if I talk about these issues.
And you talk about them with other members of the orchestra?
Yeah, with my colleagues, yes, but they know me well enough now to just either ignore me or just to accept what I'm saying. Either way, it's fine. It's just, for me, it's just offloading, I would rather do that, and I'd rather sort of let these things out. And it's normal. I mean, everyone gets nervous.
What is the difference for you between playing solo, whether concertos or recitals, chamber music, and principal horn in an orchestra?
There's very different types of playing and different mentality that go with it. I certainly, at the moment, I find chamber music and the solo playing the easier. But I think that's maybe just a control issue, I feel a little bit more in control when I'm doing these things. You can also dictate rehearsals a little bit better. In orchestra, there can be some frustration because, of course, there's a lot of waiting, there's a lot of hanging around, there's a lot of blending in with other people. But I mean, that's also good in a way because you have to really use your ears. But like I was saying before, it's the different kinds of playing that you have to use in orchestra, which sometimes makes it more rewarding, but it's more of a challenge as well, because you rely on so many other people, and you really have to use your ears very carefully to blend and then maybe just add something. I think it's very important that as musicians we think about really seeing what you can give to the orchestra, what different colours you can add to it, just to make it that little bit more magical.
What about recordings? How different is that for you?
Well, very different. I mean, recordings are something that are manufactured in just about every way you can think. And it's not something that I enjoy so much because I prefer the freedom, I guess. However, there are so many different kinds of recordings, and in London we do quite a few commercial recordings, movie soundtracks, for example, where you would just be amazed. You can have a hand-picked orchestra, which is probably one of the finest orchestras you will ever play in your life, and they're all sitting down in a studio, sight reading to perfection, and you can get real pleasure and joy from listening to something like this. It can be incredible. Other times you just sit there and you're reading a book. But when you're recording chamber music or solo works, it's really, to me, it feels like you're putting something together and you're looking for a kind of perfection that perhaps doesn't exist with me when I'm on stage. There is a certain pleasure in that as well, but I do find it's a little bit frustrating putting something together like a jigsaw, and I almost feel like I'm cheating. Does that make sense? I much prefer going to a live concert and listening to something exactly how it should be. And if there are a few blemishes but a few moments of real excitement, then God, that's worth it.
Well, how does it feel when you're on stage and it's just going really well?
Oh, see, this is the feeling, and this is at the times when it happens, you have to really remind yourself, this is why you do it. This is why you play the instrument. It's an amazing feeling. Sometimes you feel so calm, you almost feel that time is slowing down just to allow you to do everything that you want on stage. The excitement that goes with it. Each time you pick up your instrument and you feel that you just can't miss. You can try everything, you take incredible risks, and it's just absolute perfection out there.
Give me one word that would sum up, if you can, what that feeling is.
Total exhilaration. I didn't even have to think about that. It's absolutely wonderful. You're on cloud nine. You're playing great music. Everything's going well. It's just absolute exhilaration. And then at the end, you really do get this feeling of you're almost bereft of what's happened before, and you can get quite low after a really great performance. Everyone's having a nice time in the pub, and you're just really thinking, well, I'll join them, but I just want to go to bed and just go to sleep.
Martin, Owen, thank you very, very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.